If you've come here with the intention of saying the Miami Heat were bubble frauds, computer, mouse, log out, turn off the computer, do what you need to do, because that's not the case. I think it's pretty simple. Like, you put two and two together, the Miami Heat had a bad season for some reasons that I'll talk about, and just some reasons in which they had a lot of players who underperformed in the playoffs, and then a lot of other teams got better. It's kind of that simple sometimes. You go from a team that made the finals to all of a sudden a couple of teams get better, and you have a worse season in which you get worse. And yeah, you go from the finals to a first round exit. Sometimes it's that simple. Does that mean it's going to be that simple for the rest of time and the Miami Heat will continue to be first round exits? That I don't know, but I will try to talk about that. Now, before I even do that, normally I just look ahead to the future, but I just want to talk about the circumstances of this year, because I think you also have to consider they had a shortened off season, and look at what they had this season. I talked about this before, but this was a season in which, during a period of time in which Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic, Tyler Herro, and all of those guys missed significant games. I think Jimmy Butler missed 10 in a row, if I am correct. The Heat went 2-8 during that period of time. That was at the start of the year when they were trying to get their footing in the top 4 seeding. So they went 2-8 during that period of time. USA's very own killer Gabe Vincent was like their number one option. So that's a reason why their record actually is a little bit skewed, because from that point onwards, after they went 2-8 during that period of time, they went 34-20 for the rest of the season. So I think we have to understand that this wasn't a team that had the record that they ended up with. It was a little bit skewed because of the circumstances, which was mainly around protocol, Jimmy Butler, Bam, and all of those guys missing a lot of games. So let's understand that with this season. We also have to understand they were absolutely terrible in the playoffs, and there's no protocol or health and safety issues or shortened off-season excuse that you can use for that. And pretty much everyone on that team, what, Dwayne Dedmon? Dwayne Dedmon, is he the only one that didn't underperform what they did in the regular season? He might be. He might be, which is just kind of pathetic. It was pathetic, and I think Heat fans can agree that that doesn't mean that they're going to continue to be bad. And just looking back to what they did this season after that slow start, they were a top 10 defense, they were the 6th ranked defense, and an average offense, which is close enough to championship caliber. I think you look at the Milwaukee Bucks and the Phoenix Suns as obviously the barometers for this year. Both of those teams are top 10 in offense and defense, and generally that's the case. You get the gist. Championship teams don't have weaknesses, and the Heat's weakness this year, which was exposed in the playoffs, was their offense just wasn't very good, and they had some issues in that offense, which we're going to talk about. Before I even do that, if you could drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new. I make content like this every single day, and doing so would be appreciated. But getting into it, I want to talk about the internal improvement going forward, at least before I get into free agency and those things, because I think outside of getting someone like a Kawhi Leonard or someone like a Kyle Lowry, I guess, who could be a big coup if they manage to get him, outside of getting someone like those guys, most of their development is going to have to come internally. Unless Victor Oladipo resigns and turns back into his 27 version of himself, it's going to have to come internally. And I'm looking at Bam Adebayo first, because Jimmy Butler and Tyler Herro were clearly the standout disappointments for different reasons, both of them having terrible playoff runs. But Bam Adebayo was also disappointing for different reasons. I mean, he went 4 of 15 in the first game, the game in which they had a chance to win, and he just didn't look confident taking that mid-range shot that he had looked confident taking all during the regular season. He improved his mid-range shooting spectacularly. He had took a huge jump as a mid-range shooter. I thought he was a definite all-star. I thought he was a huge snub. The likes of Domantas Sabonis, I don't think were even close to the level he was, considering his offense took a huge leap, and then defensively is one of the best defenders in the league. But then in the playoffs, he went from someone who looked like he was really developing into a good offensive player to a shell of himself, not taking those mid-range shots, which allowed the defense to just trail the three-point shooters in Duncan Robinson and Tyler Herro. He wasn't getting those dribble handoffs. There wasn't as much space. He did not look like the same player, and he needs to take that improvement. He needs to be more confident taking that mid-range shot going forward into the next postseason, because during the regular season, he proved he could do it. Now it's about doing it in the playoffs again. And he needs to develop that three-point shot. I think that's the next step for Bam Adebayo. When he was asked at Team USA camp, a pretty simple question: are you going to start shooting threes? He responded with a pretty simple answer: yes. And I think I believe him. When you look at him shooting 80% from the line, as I said, he was a great mid-range shooter, like a really good one during the regular season. Forget about the playoffs. That's a 4-game sample size. I'm looking at the 70-game sample size in which he was great from the mid-range spot. You look at his free throw shooting, and you look at those factors, even in the couple of threes he's taken at the end of games or in the All-Star games, those kind of things, there's enough form there to suggest he can be a decent three-point shooter. At the very least, someone who can shoot 30% and space the floor and at least offer a threat from there, if not be even better. I think he does have potential to be even better from there. Everything suggests he continues to improve. That's the next step for him. He should realistically be their best player going forward. That's not a slight on Jimmy Butler, but if you want to be the team that gets back close to the finals, you need Bam to be your best player going forward. In my opinion, in terms of what he brings and how important he could be for the rest of the team, Bam, in my opinion, should be their best player going forward. And then Tyler Herro, just finishing on these guys from the regular season and from the playoffs before we talk about next season. Tyler Herro, I'm not fully out on him. I think no one can really seem to be objective when they're talking about Herro. It's either, oh, he can be great or he's just terrible. There's really no in-between. I sit in between as someone who thinks he averaged 15 points a game. He took a leap as a playmaker. The dude was really good in the playoffs last year. You can't call that a fluke. It's funny to me that more people would rather call the 20-game playoff run in which he was really good for 3 series in a row and decent against a really good Lakers team. That's a fluke, but the 4 games he played against a Milwaukee Bucks team with elite defenders everywhere and in which everyone else on the team struggled as well, that's not a fluke. That's reflective of what he is. Don't you see how that's a little bit of a double standard? Not just a double standard, but just kind of dumb? It's just dumb, plain dumb. 20-game sample size last year, 4-game sample size this year. We'll take the 4-game sample size because it fits our narrative. No, he's still a very good player, and I think he's still got a lot of potential. I mean, he might be traded for all I know, but I think they should keep him and grow with him because I believe alongside Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, and the other young guys they have, this is a playoff team at worst. And then we talk about the free agency because that is where things really differentiate themselves from Miami. They're going to be a decent team at worst with that core. When you've got 2 all-star level players and Bam potentially taking another step forward with Herro and those guys, they're going to be decent. We know that, but we don't want to be decent if you're Miami. You want to be better than that, and that's where they have to look into free agency. And straight away you look at Iguodala and Dragic making $34 million combined. Iggy, you're gone, mate. You're gone. Sorry, buddy, but you're out of here. 15 million for someone of your level right now is just, it's about 10 million too much. Goran Dragic is an interesting one. Might be a couple of million overpaid for what he can do right now at 35, but at the same time, I think you have to take that team option because he is going to provide a lot. He's consistently still going to be good, and you just run a risk of losing him to someone like, say, a Dallas or any of those teams that would love a veteran point guard that can bring the quality he has if you don't take that team option and try to renegotiate. It's just a bit too risky in my opinion, so I would look to re-sign him and take that option of $19 million over the next year. Then looking at some other guys, you have Duncan Robinson, Kendrick Nunn, and, well, Max Strus. But Duncan Robinson and Kendrick Nunn are restricted free agents heading into next year. Duncan Robinson is clearly the priority. We saw what they were in the playoffs. They were a team that lacks shooting. They need spacing around Jimmy and Bam. They're going to consistently need shooters. Everyone needs shooters. He is an elite one at that. Sure, he has some weaknesses in his game, but he's an elite shooter. In my opinion, you can definitely make up for the absence of Kendrick Nunn in terms of his playmaking, his creation with Jimmy, Bam, Tyler, Dragic. All of those guys can make up for it. Duncan Robinson, you can't really make up for his off-ball movement, his off-ball shooting, and everything that he brings to this team that desperately needs the kind of player he is. How much is he going to get paid is interesting because you saw guys like Kennard, Davis Bertans, Joe Harris, all of these guys get paid a ton of money, and none of them really panned out, which is kind of worrying if you're the Heat and you're looking to pay Duncan Robinson somewhere around that $12 to $15 million range, which is what he's going to command. It's just the reality. He's going to command that much money from some team, and if the Heat don't pay it, someone else will pay it. It is a little bit concerning. Joe Harris was obviously the best of them, but then struggled in the playoffs. But I guess you've seen what Robinson is in the postseason a couple of years in a row, and he's still been pretty decent. So I think you have enough confidence that come postseason, he's now been consistent for 2 years in the regular season and pretty decent in the playoffs, that you pay that money and you just try to keep him. He is someone alongside Dragic that you want to keep, and then moving on from there, you should have somewhere in the 15 to 20 million range. Somewhere in that range. Not the best with the cap space. Didn't look into it probably enough, but Dwayne Dedmon is someone that I'd look to re-sign on a minimum. Dwayne Dedmon was good in the playoffs. I wasn't joking when I said he was probably the only one that didn't underperform, which is sad, but also at the same time, silver lining, bring him back. Maybe he'll be helpful again. And then guys that I guess you could look to bring in as well. Lonzo Ball has been a name that's been mentioned with a lot of teams. Miami's kind of stuck under the radar in those stakes, but he could be impactful to the team. They need playmaking. They need shooting. He's a good off-ball player. As I said, he brings that playmaking as well, so he would make sense if he would fit. I don't know how much money they would have to give him, whether it'd be enough to match teams like Chicago, Kyle Lowry as well. You'd probably have to decline that Goran Dragic team option if you were to go after Lowry, and in my opinion, well, it's a tough one because Dragic in the playoffs has proven to be a different level to what he was in the regular season, so you compare that to Lowry. Maybe it's not really worth it and you take another player alongside Dragic instead of just putting all your chips into the Lowry basket. I could see that being a more viable option. And other players to look out for, I guess the obvious one is Victor Oladipo. Do you re-sign him? Do you take a chance on him? He's probably going to take a chance on a one-year deal, I'd imagine, trying to get a max contract going forward because I don't see anyone paying him much money heading into this offseason on a big deal. He's injured right now. He's coming off another bad/average season where he just doesn't look like the player he once did, but he seems adamant that he'll get back to that when he's healthy, which most players obviously are, so I expect him to probably take a one-year deal unless someone just comes out with a bit of a ridiculous offer. And then if you're Miami, you're hopeful that he gets back to his best, and that's the X-Factor player alongside Bam and Herro making those jumps. That's really where your X-Factor lies, unfortunately, if you're Miami. It's in Oladipo. Unless you can get a big free agent like, say, a Kyle Lowry, or bring in someone like maybe a Lonzo Ball, or even a Kawhi Leonard, which does seem very unlikely. Maybe Victor Oladipo getting back to his best is the biggest thing that you can bank on in terms of taking that improvement, getting back to the top of the East. I don't think they're that far away. They got swept by the Bucks. That was a rough series for a lot of reasons. As I said, Jimmy Butler's not shooting under 30% from the field again. Tyler Herro won't be that bad in the playoffs again. Bam Adebayo. I don't need to go through the whole list because I would literally go through the whole list of players that were bad in the playoffs that won't be that bad again. I don't think they get swept in a different circumstances. Maybe it goes to 5, maybe it goes to 6, and we're seeing how good this Bucks team is. I don't think the Heat are that bad. 34-20 again after they got healthy. A top defense, a decent offense. But they do have some areas to improve. Bam Adebayo needs to take that step as a shooter and just as a player in general. He's really good, but he needs to be even better. He needs to be pushing that top 10 range, in my opinion, for this team to compete for a championship again. That is the key. And obviously Victor Oladipo, I think that's a stretch if he can get back to his best, but he could at least be a good role player for this team if they can sign him on a one-year deal and what else they can do around that. That's my thoughts on the Miami Heat. I don't think they're in a terrible situation, but a lot of it comes down to Bam, Jimmy, and Herro alongside Oladipo or whoever else they decide to bring in.